There's a lot of servants in the franchise that are part divine. Many of them you're probably well familiar with just because they're pushed in your face all the time. But what I wanted to highlight today are some of the ones that are lesser known, ones that you may have never even ran into. The first one we'll be looking at is the servant form of Francis Prelati. Prelati actually has E-rank divinity, and it's said that he shares blood with the Greek deity known as Eris, a goddess of mischief, strife, and ruin, which is perfect for his character. She is a goddess that goes around tricking men and even the gods into irrational decisions that lead to their suffering. It's even been said from an anecdote that Eris is the one that influenced Zeus to lose the birthright that he had set up for Heracles, that being to rule over the city of Argos. And this ended up getting Eris tossed out of Olympus altogether. Next up, we got Eris from Fate Requiem. She also has E-rank divinity. Her materials tell us that her divinity comes from one of the creator goddesses from Japanese myth, Izanami. She is said to be Eris's mother. Izanami is in fact said to be the same reason why Eris is a quasi-servant, someone who was birthed from a human and a servant coming together. Izanami was that servant. Izanami holds a really high stature in terms of the Nasuverse, given the fact that she actually gave birth to the Japanese pantheon. She's the one that birthed Susanoo, Amaterasu, Tsukiyomi, and Rajin, and that's just scratching the surface. She is a goddess of the underworld, the same way Eris has her underworld traits. This is also how Eris got her spear, the Sakahoko, which is a replica of Izanami's spear that was used as a part of her creation of the other gods. Moving on over, we're going to be looking at Sanzo. She has a D rank in divinity. This actually comes from the fact that she attained Buddhahood in her background. Believe it or not, Sanzo is heavily downgraded in her container, and normally she wouldn't even respond to our summons. There's also the fact that in the Journey to the West, it said that she's a direct reincarnation of Buddha's second disciple, Jin Chanzi, one that had already reached enlightenment. By the way, Buddha is a spirit in the Fate verse. If you didn't know, he's in Fate Extra. For another one, we got Kintoki. He has D-rank divinity. This stems from the fact of him being the son of the lightning god Rajin. He's the grandson of Izanami, and it's also important to point out the fact that his divinity has actually been lowered due to the fact of his mother being a yokai. Surprisingly enough, Caesar is also divine. He is yet another person that has D rank in the skill, and it's said that he is a descendant of the goddess from the Roman pantheon, Venus, who happens to be the goddess of love, desire, and victory. She's the equivalent to Aphrodite. Just to put that into the air, there's a point in his life where he outright claimed that she was his ancestor and said that she had given him divine protection in his battle against Pompey the Great. And once the battle was over, he vowed that he would build her a temple in her name if he came out with the win. And you can best believe that that temple was built. Musashi Miyamoto. Her summer form highlights her D rank and her divinity skill. In the background, she's well known for being tapped in with her spirituality, that being Buddhism, showcasing a high level of enlightenment through concepts like her reaching the void despite her only being a human. But the main part of the skill comes from an anecdote in verse where it said that she ate Buddha's offering itself. There was a session where fried rice was being offered to Buddha, and Musashi thought it would be a good idea to straight up eat Buddha's offering out of the Holy Grail because she just couldn't help herself, which is something that she often gets embarrassed about. You got Fion, the leader of the mighty Knights of Fianna. He too has a D rank in the divinity scale, and his is said to be because he is a descendant of the Celtic war god Nuada, someone who is posed to be Fion's great grandfather. Nuada is in fact the same deity where the concept of Bedivir's prosthetic arm, Ergetlam, comes from. This arm originally belonged to Nuada and he lost it during battle. which at that point he had the Irish god of blacksmith use his powers to sew it back on. Nuada also was the first king from a supernatural race. He is the same god that Bazet's phantasm Froggerok comes from. It's a sword belonging to him that carried on down to her. And if you've ever wondered, he's the reason that Fionn has access to water in his phantasm due to his authority over it. For the next one, we got another interesting subject, and that is King David from the Testament. He too has D rank in his divinity. The reason being inverse is because he's an ancestor of Jesus Christ himself, and he's been bestowed with the divine nature to complement that. Because of this, he has an innate defense against conceptual relics and even phantasms that might go against him through his divinity from Christ. Things like the holy shrouds, stakes, the holy lance Longinus, and possibly even the Holy Grail will all be ineffective on him thanks to this buff. Going even further than that, he literally has a skill called Divine Protection, where he regards his summoning as less of being a servant and more so of him being a literal instrument of God. There's been countless amount of times where God has distinctly saved David in a time where he shouldn't have survived. One of the biggest parts of his background being when he was hunted down by King Saul, and it never worked out for Saul no matter how much he tried, because David was coming with those divine weaves. We got Cleopatra VII, the final pharaoh of ancient Egypt. She has a D rank in her divinity thanks to the fact that the pharaohs of Egypt being said to have a connection with God themselves. The reason that hers is so low is because she comes from one of the later dynasties, the Ptolemaic dynasty, where their divinity was wearing thin. The further out you get from the original pharaohs, the lower it gets. Normally, she wouldn't even have the skill, but since she's looked at as an incarnation of Isis, thanks to her beauty, she's acquired it anyway. Isis being a goddess of healing, magic, and contradiction. Much like David, she also has a skill directly devoted to her having the protection of Isis, and that is her protection of the goddess skill at C rank. Again, Isis is the equivalent to Aphrodite and Venus, and if you remember, Cleopatra was with Julius Caesar. So as it turns out, not only were they together, but they also worshiped the same goddess of their own respective pantheons, likely thanks to the influence. Cleopatra would often identify herself as Isis. She wore robes and styles that embodied her name, and every time she came around, most of the people were captivated just from looking at her. Then we have one of your favorite Onis fresh in the building, and that is Shuten Doji. Her divinity comes in at C rank. We're moving on up. This is thanks to her being an incarnation of the legendary dragon Orochi. Normally her divinity would be higher in this vessel, but due to her being an Oni, the rank has been dropped. Orochi is said to have 8 heads and 8 tails. He would cause disaster all throughout the lands, demanding daughters as a sacrifice every year. In terms of size, his body was big enough to cover 8 valleys and 8 hills, and when Susanoo was kicked out of heaven, he actually defeated Orochi by trapping the dragon in a large fence with 8 gates. In Shuten's real form, which is Ibuki Doji, she is actually the direct daughter of Orochi, and this time around she has her divine core of the snake god, coming in at A rank, much higher than before. Normally it should be hard for her to have this skill, but her being a child of Orochi overrides this and allows her to keep it anyway. And of course, having a divine core inherently gives you more protection. We got Semiramis, who is one that should be a lot more known, but she does hardly get the mention. That stemming from the fact of her being a demigoddess and her mother being the Syrian goddess Derceto. And not only is her mother a goddess, but she was also a chief goddess, meaning a deity above gods. She is also the equivalent of Aphrodite, Hera, and Astarte. She's one of the only goddesses described to be a mermaid, and this is why you see Semiramis with the scales. If you've ever noticed, they come from her. You have Mama Raiko in both her regular and her swimsuit form. She does have a C rank in divinity. This is thanks to her connection with the Japanese god Gozu Tenno, but focuses more so on his Hindu equivalent in the Fate verse, the Hindu lightning god Indra. Indra. Indra is in fact the king of gods, so he operates as an equivalent to entities like Zeus, Jupiter, Susano, and even Thor. He is the original owner of Vasavi Shakti, the noble phantasm that was given to Karna, and he's the one that went out to take down several Asuras in his background, including one of the spirits from Fate, Vitra. He is the original owner of the armor that was given to Karna, Kavacha and Kundala. He's the owner of Sakra, the weapon that Raiko uses in her swimsuit form. He's the owner of Vajra, a phantasm used by several servants like Gil, known for its highly destructive power. This also was used to take down Vitra, and he's the godly father of Arjuna. You got Iskander. His adult form and his younger variant have rank C and E in divinity respectively, and this is something that stems from the stories that surround him being the son of Zeus. The reason that his younger form, Alexander, has a lower rank is because he hasn't realized himself as Iskander yet. The stories of him being connected to Zeus were said to be started by him and then further perpetuated by oracles and other people that spoke on his name. The reason that he believed in it so much is because his mother Olympias said that she had a dream that lightning struck her womb before his birth, designating that very connection. It is the very reason that Iskander has his chariot phantasm, Gordius' wheel. It was outright said to be a gift from Zeus after receiving it from King Gordius. And then there's the legend of Iskander untying the Gordian knot, a very complex knot that nobody could break apart, and then Iskander just pulls up and slices straight through it with his sword and amazes everybody. The two divine bulls that pull the chariot come from the background of Zeus. It also highlights a story of Zeus turning into a bull himself. It's also the reason why he has skills like Lightning Conqueror EX, or the reason he can imbue his weapons with lightning in general. Next up, we have Saint George and Martha, both of which being recognized as well-known saints, and thus they have a high connection in spirituality, giving them access to divinity as a part of their kit, both of them having C rank. Saint George being one of the 7 champions of Christendom, and he's also known for slaying a dragon in his legend. And then likewise you have Martha, who we've already covered on the channel, has actually housed Jesus himself in her background. Her connection with divinity pretty much builds up the foundation of her entire kit, and it's the reason that she was also able to defeat a dragon, the same one that she now uses in her phantasm Taras. There's the female version of Jacques de Molay. She has divinity, and this is thanks to her being a vessel for one of the outer gods, Shub-Niggurath. Shub is one of the great deities from H.P. Lovecraft's work. She's actually described to be a mother goddess with at least 1,000 young, one of the highest outer gods there is. There's Hokusai in her regular and her swimsuit form, having B rank and C rank in divinity respectively. Again, Hokusai is the little octopus for those who don't know. He is a male, I just refer to them collectively as a she, and the female is the body of his daughter that he latches on to. Hokusai is said to have a background where she came in contact with yet another outer god from H.P. Lovecraft, one that's more well known, and that is Cthulhu. It's the reason that she now has divinity, it's the reason that he's intertwined with her spirit, and it's the reason she's a part of the foreigner class. There's Altera. She has B rank in divinity, and the reason being is because with Altera being Attila the Hun at her base, when she rampaged through Europe as the Scourge of God, it's that very story of being the Scourge of God gained her an authority of God, thus giving her said divinity. Abigail, again the same as Hokusai, she too has been given a high level of divinity, giving her a B rank in her normal form and a B plus in her swimsuit, thanks to the fact of her being a gate for the outer gods. In her case, it was her connection to the god Yog-Sothoth. Next over, we got Noah, who is actually already a grand servant anyway. He also has a B rank in divinity thanks to his connection with God and him traveling on his ark. He has an actual skill, Protection of the Faith, which is at EX for that very reason, where he just outright receives blessings in the same way that David did. Then there's his skill, Voyager of Salvation, which is yet another protection skill, highlighting the fact that he survived on the ark. That skill is at B rank as well. Yongui Wefe has a B rank in divinity, something that highlights her connection with the outer god Cthulhu. It's the reason that she's in the foreigner class. Van Gogh has a B rank in divinity thanks to her connection with the outer god Volthum. This too has landed her a position in the foreigner class. Nito Chris has divinity in both her regular and her swimsuit form, B rank and B plus respectively. Again, just like Cleopatra, it's because she was a pharaoh, and thus in her living circumstances she was worshipped as a god and presented herself as such. In the case of pharaohs, it has a lot to do with the era that they come from. In the case of Nito Chris, when you're recognized as a child of God like her, you can achieve this rank. She's recognized as the daughter of Horus, who was the Egyptian god of the sky. And then there's Rama, with one of the highest divinities on the board, coming in at A rank. Not only was Rama a king and especially strong and good at combat, but he also was an avatar of one of the three primordials, Vishnu, and so he's been blessed with one of the highest levels of divinity you can have. And there's no point in leaving my girl out. You got Suzuka Gozen, who also has an A rank in divinity in both her regular form and her Santa form. This is thanks to her father being the demon king of the fourth heaven. To go further into her Santa version, it's even stated that her divinity should be higher because being in the Santa form actually scales you up. But since her divinity is so high already, it's stagnated because otherwise she would actually break her container. When it comes to Bibi Pele, one of the components to her spirit as a high servant is also an outer god, Nyarlathotep. But her divinity comes from her other component, the Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes, Pele, giving her a divine core of the goddess at an A rank. And then you have Captain Nemo being a host for the sea god Triton, who is the son of Poseidon. This netted him an A rank in divinity.